Derek, a big hand.
Thanks. All right, I love that talk. It's funny, I've been doing music, what they call music conferences in the US, and everybody talks about music business, and nobody talks about the music itself. Because everybody's, you have a big conference like South by Southwest with 1,000 musicians, and this person's an acoustic fingerstyle guitarist, and this person's a metal band, and so they all get together and all they want to talk about is how to get a record deal. So that was actually, honestly, like the first time I've come to something called a conference like this, and actually talked about music, which is just so nice. So unfortunately, I didn't prepare something that was about music directly, but that's what's making me more excited for these get-togethers to keep happening. So the thing that I was going to talk about is this stage in my life. I'm trying to compress 10 years of what I learned making a living as a musician, trying to compress like the most important or counterintuitive lessons I learned into a quick 30-minute talk for you guys. So the story is that I went to Berklee College of Music in Boston. I decided at 14 years old that I was going to be a professional musician for life. And deciding that at 14 puts you into an interesting mindset that I think has a lot in common with entrepreneurs. Because at 14, deciding I'm going to be a professional musician no matter what it takes, that means I would never have a job, I will never have a salary, I'll never have health insurance, I'll never have a pension, I'll never have any of that stuff that I realized that a lot of my friends that was their vision of life, is that I'll get a good job, I'll get a steady paycheck, I'll get a house, and almost like somebody would take care of them, somebody from up above, a big company or a government. But I think like deciding I'm going to be a musician means nobody's going to help me. Everything I ever want to get in life will be entirely up to me. So that was kind of my attitude in life that really kind of fueled my workaholic approach to everything. So there was just one key moment that changed my life. In high school, I was a pretty bad student because high school was preparing us for college, and I didn't want to go to college because I was like, I'm going to be a musician, I don't want to go to college. So I blew off most of high school, and I was a really bad student. But then just a month before, I decided I was going to go to Berklee College of Music, and just a month or two before going there, I was already signed up and accepted. I was living in Chicago at the time, and I ran into this teacher named Kimo Williams, who, when I told him I was going to Berklee, he said, oh really? He said, I used to teach at Berklee. He said, listen, why don't you come by my studio tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock? Let me show you some stuff before you go off to Berklee. I said, okay. So I showed up in his studio, and you guys, it was the most intense lesson. He kind of just, whereas all of my high school teachers always set the bar very low, they'd kind of say, okay class, here's a verb, this is how to conjugate a verb. Everything kind of had this pandering, talking down to kind of approach to it. I went into Kimo's studio at 9 a.m. and he said, okay, you're going to go to Berklee, they're going to require you to know music theory, they're going to require you to know jazz music theory. So I'm going to show you 4 years of Berklee's jazz harmony classes in 4 hours. Ready? Go. He said, okay, this is the real book. Now look, you've got these chord progressions. He said, what's a major scale? I said, what do you mean what's a major scale? I said, tell me a major scale. I went, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, Z. He said, right, now do it in E flat. I went, E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat, C, D, E flat. He said, right, now if you build a triad off of any one of those, do you know how to do that? Build a triad off of the E flat. I said, okay, E flat, G, B flat. He said, okay, build me a triad off of the G. He said, okay, now what do you call that? If it's built on the third note of the scale, what do you think you call that? I said, you call it a 3. He said, right, but it's got a B flat, so is it a major or minor? Minor. Okay, so an E flat major has a 3 minor scale. Got it? Okay, now look at this chart. And like our 3-hour lesson went at this kind of pace, and he was like pushing me and pushing me. And sure enough, in a 3-hour lesson, well then he sent me home with some homework, and in a 3-hour lesson, and we met one more time the following week, he had showed me 4 semesters of Berklee's jazz harmony classes. So that when I went to Berklee 6 weeks later, they have the entrance exams, and I tested out of 4 semesters of harmony classes. And then he did the same thing with arranging. He showed me the range of the ranges of the different instruments, taught me about clusters versus spreads and this and that, and kind of taught me 2 semesters of arranging classes in 2 hours. And his overall theory was that, he said, I think most schools and most things in life go too slow because they try to pace themselves to the lowest common denominator. So when they tell you it takes 4 years to go through college, he said, no, that means that the lowest common denominator takes 4 years to go through college. He said, if you've got ambition, he said, I think you can graduate college in 2 years. And I was his guinea pig test subject to see if that was true. So, yeah, sure enough, just right there in like about 4 or 5 lessons, he saved me, I don't know, I think all in all I tested out of about 12 classes. And then he taught me a little known fact. He said, at Berklee School of Music, as with a lot of universities, you can go to the head of the department for anything that is a required test subject. Say like we had to take lessons in classical counterpoint and fugues. He said, it's a pretty boring subject. You can learn it on your own. You don't need to sit in a class, for 2 hours a week for 12 weeks to learn it. If you've got any kind of go power in your life at all, you can get the book yourself, learn it yourself, and then go to the head of the department and take the final exam for full credit for the course. So he said, just give that a try. So once I went off to Berklee, I took all of these kind of boring requirements and bought the book myself. And so I tested out like another 8 classes just by going and taking the final exam directly from the head of the department. And yeah, so sure enough, I graduated college in 2 years. And I had my bachelor's degree at 20 years old, and I moved to New York City. But what it did for me is it changed my kind of just outlook on life. All of a sudden, kind of like the Matrix, there is no spoon. All of a sudden you start looking at the whole world like, okay, so everybody tells you this is the way to do things, but what they really mean is that's the kind of lowest common denominator, boring way of doing things, but there's always a better, more efficient way. So I threw myself into New York City. And just a couple months before I moved there, Berklee College of Music is in Boston, so New York City is just a few hour drive down the road. So it just kind of seemed to me to be the best place for me to go. There was a class, we had I think it was called the Business of Songwriting class. And a speaker came to our class. It was about twice this size, there were maybe 40 of us there. And just as the guest speaker was walking into the room, I heard him kind of say to the teacher, like, oh, we're starting now? The teacher said, yeah. And he said, we're not going to eat first? He said, no. He said, I thought you ate already. He said, no, I thought there was food. And he said, oh, man. And the teacher said, oh, I'm really sorry. He said, how long is the class? He said, 3 hours. He went, oh, no. So while everybody was still getting settled, I had the phone number of the pizza place memorized. So this is before cell phones. It was 1988. I dashed out to the payphone and I called Supreme's Pizza and I said, 3 large pizzas, 2 pepperoni, 1 cheese, room 318, Berklee College of Music, please. And about 45 minutes into his talk, 3 pizzas arrived. And he looked at me and said, all right, I owe you one. Good move. So he came up to me after class. He said, what's your name? I said, Derek. And he said, that was a really good move. He said, look, here's my card. Contact me anytime you need anything. And I was 18 years old, and I started sending him my music for critique. And I started taking a bus down to New York City sometimes to visit him. And every time I would, he would give me a kind of like a crash course in the music business. He'd spend like 2 hours telling me everything he thought I needed to know about the music business. And I did that for a year or two, and this is while I was still in school. And so now a month before I was set to move down to New York City anyway, I told him that I was moving there. And he said, just get me your resume, I'll get you a job. And I thought, okay, there's only so much you can promise, It's one thing to say, I'll treat you to lunch, but to say, I'll get you a job, that's too much to promise. But I gave him my resume, and sure enough, like literally about like 5 days before I was set to move to New York, the phone rang in my dorm room at 7 o'clock at night, and there's this woman saying, hi, I'm looking for Derek Sivers, please. And I said, that's me. She said, this is Julie from Warner Chappell Music in New York. Mark Fried said we should hire you, and we're looking for somebody to run the tape room, and I'm wondering if you can start tomorrow morning. And I went, yeah, I'll do it. She said, don't you want to know what it pays? I said, oh, okay, what does it pay? I was like, yes, I'll take the job. Yes, I want it. Okay. So literally, I mean, it's 3 or 4 hour bus ride, and she wanted me to start in the morning, and it was already 7 o'clock at night. I had to take a midnight bus to New York City that got in at 5 in the morning, found my way to Warner Chappell's office, and for the next 2.5 years, I was the head of Warner Brothers Music Publishing tape room, which was a room about twice the size of this entire cafe, filled with every single piece of music that Warner Brothers owned. It was the master copy of everything, and that was my room. And I was the guy in charge of this room. And it was in the days of cassettes, and this whole wall had 24 cassette decks on it, and like 6 CD players and the little DAT machines. And my job was that anytime anybody needed a copy of anything, it was my job to make a copy of it, and anytime a new piece of music came in, it was my job to kind of archive it and get it into the system. It was the most amazing entry-level job to get to know the music business. And I was in the music business. I was working at Warner Brothers in New York City, smack in the middle of my target market. And so the lessons I learned there, a couple of the things I wanted to share with you guys, is, when you're outside of the music business, or you want to be a professional musician, you want to, say, get a record deal or get a professional manager or whatever, you often hear this phrase, they say, don't send unsolicited demos. And they don't really explain what that means. But what you find out is that all the people, whether it's a manager, a booking agent, a record label, they're already packed solid with the people that are already their clients. And so every day, like a box of stuff shows up at the door full of people, CDs from people that want a deal with them. And they just ignore it all because they're busy. And so the only way to really get their attention is to go in through a channel from somebody they already know. So while I was working there, I saw literally every day crates of CDs would show up, and they would just send them directly to the mailroom to be sent back. Partially for legal reasons, they didn't ever want to show that they had ever opened or received the package, so somebody couldn't sue them later saying, "You heard my song and stole it." So they'd say, "No, we don't allow anybody to send anything, but here's what I would see." And I love this kind of fly-on-the-wall perspective of just being the humble tape room guy, so I could just kind of watch to see what was going on, is that, say like the VP of the company would have his office here, somebody would come in for a meeting with him, and it was an existing client, so say it was like the producer or manager of one of our existing clients, say songwriters or artists, the manager or producer would come in, and they'd say, "Hey man, all right, let's go out to lunch." And they'd say, "Hey, before we do, I want you to hear this new kid I'm working with, he's amazing. Let me just put this on in your office for a minute, you gotta hear this guy." And then I got it. It's like, that's how you get in to the big companies, is all you have to do is first get in with the people that are working with the company that you want to get to. So if you want to be signed to Warner Brothers, you don't approach Warner Brothers, you do your research and you find out who are the managers and the producers of the artists that are already on Warner Brothers, and you find them, and then if they take you on, then you're truly in. So that was one cool lesson learned. Another one was that one day on somebody's desk, I walked by and this woman had walked away from her desk to go to the bathroom or something. And on the desk was a printed out spreadsheet of all of the writers signed to our office. By writers, I mean the songwriters, it was the music publishing division. All of the writers signed how much was their advance and how much they had recouped. I was like, oh my God. And I quickly took this piece of paper and I ran over to the Xerox machine and I put it back on her desk. And that night, I went home on the Sunday looking at this, going, oh shit. Because I learned such a great lesson. Let me tell you 2 writers that were on that list that were the most extreme examples. Number one, there was a writer. She was one of our best songwriters. Very professional, kind of a music publisher's dream. Because a lot of music publishers, their goal is to kind of take a song and get it cut by a major artist. So Barbra Streisand is looking for a song, Celine Dion is looking for a song. You take these songwriters, you want to get them recorded. She would turn in a great song every week. Very commercial, very pitchable, great recording. She was just very kind of friendly and professional and wonderful, and a publisher's dream. Her advance was $15,000 because she hadn't had any success yet. Somebody at the company heard her, believed in her, and decided to take a chance on her. So they signed her to a publishing deal for $15,000. And then elsewhere on that list, was a writer who, when he was a teenager, he was in a band with Bon Jovi for a little while, and I guess one of his earlier songs on the very first record, he got like 1/8 of a songwriting credit on an album that ended up selling 10 million copies. But because of that success, he was now considered a successful writer. But his music that he was turning in was terrible. It was like bad heavy metal. And I know the difference between good and bad. It was bad. It was that stuff where the melody always follows the bass line. You know? And not only that, the year was 1992. He was still turning in all of his demos on reel-to-reel tape. I was like, oh God, every time he'd like send in something from New Jersey, I'd have to dust off the reel-to-reel machine and thread it through and load it up, and they were badly recorded demos and just terrible songs of no commercial value whatsoever. But his advance was $500,000 because he had been in a band with Bon Jovi and got 1/8 of a songwriting credit on an album that sold 10 million copies. So to me, the biggest lesson learned that day from seeing this balance sheet is that you have to make your own success first before you go asking anybody in the music industry for help. Because even if a best case scenario, like the first writer, this woman that was a great writer, she got a best case scenario. Somebody just heard her and believed in her and signed her to a deal. But she still had no leverage whatsoever and got a terrible little deal because she hadn't made her own success first. She got a publishing deal before she had kind of made something of herself. Another example, kind of similar note, is there was this guy, I think I can say his name now. I left out the names of the last story because, you're recording. But there's this other guy named Jerry DeVoe that he started he was just this guy that started hanging around the office. And it always seemed like he had this kind of laid back personality. He'd always be like, hey man, how's it going? What you doing? What's going on here? And hey, I'm going out to get lunch. You guys need anything? And need help with anything? He just kind of started hanging around. Everybody was a little bit like, who is this guy? But Jocelyn Cooper, this woman who works there, she knew him through somebody else and she let him kind of hang around. And what he started doing though is, now he had no track record in the music business whatsoever, but by putting himself where things were happening, meaning hanging out at Warner Brothers 1 or 2 days a week, hanging around, he got himself kind of in the pulse of what was going on. Pulse. So pretty soon, little opportunities would come up where somebody would say, hey, there's this producer, Bernard Purdy, that's got some tracks that he doesn't have a melody to. And Jerry would say, I'll write a melody to that. And somebody would say, all right, have a go. So he'd come back the next day and having written a melody to somebody else's tracks. And next time somebody needed vocals for something, it's I'll do that. And just by being there in the middle of things, he just started to get some action happening. So I quit my job there after 2.5 years, mostly because I was too happy. But a year later, I got a Billboard magazine in the mail, and the back cover, Warner Chappell Music Publishing, would like to congratulate Jerry DeVoe as being the most recorded songwriter in the entire catalog of Warner Chappell for the year of whatever year that was. So the deal was that he came in there with no track record at all, and within 1 year he was the most recorded writer in the roster, just because he kept himself in the middle of what was going on and just said yes to everything and threw himself in there. So let's see. Other lessons learned. There was a publicist who was in really high demand. She was something so I had my own band and I was trying to get myself out there and be successful, and I decided I wanted to hire a publicist because I wanted to be in Rolling Stone. In fact, hold on, let me tell you this story first. I decided I wanted to be in Rolling Stone magazine, and I thought of a good way to do it is I bought a Rolling Stone magazine, and they call it the masthead, the thing that's in the first few pages, the little fine print where it says the contact information, Rolling Stone magazine, 1296th Avenue, New York City, New York, the phone number 212-595-3000. And I just started remembering, what's the worst that can happen? So I called up Rolling Stone magazine, but right before I did, I noticed that while working at Warner Brothers, sometimes the receptionist would need to take a break, and she'd asked if I could fill in for her for a minute because I was just a lowly taperoom guy, you know. So I actually really enjoyed it. So all of a sudden I'm working at the front desk of Warner Chappell, and not to like stack 3 tangents on top of each other, but one day this guy walks into our office, and I'm like, I know you from somewhere. And he said, I've got an HBO special. I went, no, that's not it. And he's like, I've been on this TV show. I said, no, that's not it. And you know what it was? I had been to another music business conference called the New Music Seminar, and he was one of the speakers there. I was like, I know you from the New Music Seminar. And he's like, what? What, really? Okay. He goes, whatever. Anyway, that was Chris Rock. I didn't have a TV, so I didn't recognize him from anything else, but I recognized him as being one of the speakers. So I actually enjoyed working at the front desk just for these random encounters that would happen. But the funny thing that would happen is now I'm in control of the switchboard of Warner Chappell Music Publishing in New York City. So I'd pick up the phone, you know, the phone would ring every minute, pick it up and I'd say, Warner Chappell. And I've noticed that the people that were professional would just say something like, licensing please. I'd say, okay, let me patch you through. Or they'd say, calling for John Passion's office. I'd say, okay, patch him right through. But every now and then, like 1 out of 10 calls, they'd say, Warner Chappell Music. And they'd say, oh, hey, so I was wondering, like, are you guys like trying to, like, are you signing writers? Maybe like I could send you music, you know? And by now the other phone's ringing. I'm like, let them really say it doesn't work that way. You can't come on. So it's just you got to find another avenue. Sorry, I gotta go. Bye. And so I never wanted to be that guy, right? So I want to get my music into Rolling Stone magazine. I find the contact information for Rolling Stone magazine. And I thought, okay, I can't just call up and say, hey, can you write about my music in your magazine? So instead, I decided to act like I do this all the time. So I called the main number, the woman picks up, she says, Rolling Stone. I said, editorial please. And she just patched me right through. So then this guy picks up the phone, he's like, editorial. I was like, oh my God, I'm on the phone with editorial at Rolling Stone magazine. So luckily I was a little prepared for this. I still didn't want to be that guy, you know, hey, can you write about my music? So instead I acted so calm and cool. I said, I'm calling from a record label, but I don't want to tell you which one because I don't want you to think I'm pitching something today. We're actually just looking to hire a new publicist. I'm wondering who you'd recommend. And he said, all right, good question. He said, Michelle from CDBaby's really cool. They always bring us good stuff. Nicole Blackman's really good. She's always bringing us good stuff. And this company said, yeah, those are probably the top 3. I said, okay, cool, thanks. Bye. That was it. And then I called up Spin Magazine. Same thing, did the same. Spin Magazine, editorial please. Editorial. Hi, I'm calling to hire a new publicist. So now I've called like all the kind of my top magazines and I've asked who their favorite publicists are. Because you know, this is how it works. It's the publicists that get things in a magazine. So if editorial Rolling Stone has told you who their favorite publicist is, that's who you should be working with. So I noticed that this woman, Nicole Blackman, her name, a few different magazines recommended her. So I just went straight to Nicole Blackman. And this time, even better by the way, I was able to say, Chris Jones from Rolling Stone said I should contact you. She was like, okay, let's talk. I highly recommend this technique, by the way. It works. So now I'm in a meeting with Nicole Blackman, who's kind of one of the most in-demand publicists at the time in New York City. And here's my other lesson learned. I call this persistence is polite. You know, when you're young and dating and you have a crush on somebody and you call them repeatedly and they don't call you back, you're supposed to just take a hint. We've all learned that the hard way, you know, they're just not into you. And, you know, after much heartbreak, we learn that lesson. But I found out that in business, it's the opposite. That persistence isn't dumb or rude, persistence is polite. And I learned this from Nicole Blackman because she told me how they work. I said, so how would a musician get you there? Partially I wanted to talk about myself, but partially I wanted to kind of share what I was learning with her so I could share it with some other musicians. So I said, how would a musician send you their music in an effective way? She said, okay. She said, see that huge box there? And it's like this huge crate, almost like the size of a refrigerator or washing machine by the front door. She said, every single package that comes in the front door, we just throw it in that big box and ignore it. And then, when somebody calls up and says, did you get my package? We say, how many times have you called before? And they say, this is my first time calling. I said, okay, we'll get back to you. She said, because it's their first time calling, we know it's probably in the big box. We find it in the big box, and then we have a smaller box. We throw it in the second box, and we ignore it. When they call a second time and say, hi, Mr. Chris, I'm wondering if you got my package. We say, how many times have you called before? I've called once before. Okay, we'll get back to you. Now we know it's in the second box, we find it, and at that point she said, either we'll put it on somebody's desk, or if we're really busy, we'll just throw it in the third box and go through that more step. But assuming it gets onto somebody's desk, we still don't really deal with it yet. And then when they call a third time saying, I'm calling to see if you got my package, I haven't heard from you yet, we say, how many times have you called before? This is my third time calling. Okay, we'll get back to you very soon. Now we know it's on somebody's desk, now we open it. Because the truth is, we don't want to waste our time working with somebody that doesn't care enough to follow up 3 times, at least. This is our natural filter. We're super busy. There are 10,000 people that want to work with us. We can only afford to work with 20 at a time. We only want to work with the 100 that can call back 3 times, and then we'll narrow it down to the 20. So to me, that was a huge lesson learned, is that then years later when I started CDBaby, and now all of a sudden I was that guy that was on the receiving end of everybody wanting to talk to me, and it was just too much, and I had the best of intentions, and I had a massive email box, and sometimes I would have to do that email bankruptcy thing where you just kind of select all, delete. So there were some people, I'm sure, over my kind of like 10 years at CDBaby, that sent me an email once, and then they didn't hear back from me, and to this day they still probably tell everybody that I'm an asshole. So that to me is not considerate. That's kind of rude. Whereas the polite thing is the people who sent me an email once, I didn't get back to them. Instead of getting angry, they were considerate and understood that I don't hate them, I probably just something happened, and so they emailed a second time or called and had the persistence to get through to me. And then when they actually do, I'm like, oh, thank you, sorry it took me so long to get back to you, thanks for calling 3 times in a row, I really appreciate it. That to me was polite. So to me that was a really one of the kind of most counterintuitive lessons learned, is that persistence is polite. Let's see, another one I really learned the hard way is the importance of describing your music well. How am I doing on time?
5 minutes.
All right, perfect. The importance of describing your music well. Because living in New York City, being such a major music hub, you run into so many musicians, and a lot of them, when you say, it's this classic moment where you've got a guitar on your shoulder, you're walking down the street, and somebody says, oh, you're a musician. What kind of music do you do? And you know what most musicians say in that moment? They go, oh, it's kind of all time, kind of, a little classical jazz pop, kind of a little some, a little kind of funk fusion, something. It's really, I do every kind of style. You just gotta check us out. In fact, here, we're playing next Thursday night at Pigeonhole at 11 p.m. You just gotta come check us out, So, I always try to think of everything from the other person's point of view, right? So now imagine if you were to bump into somebody wearing a very nice suit, and you said, oh, you're very clean, what do you do? And they said, oh, well, I run a business. And you say, oh, what kind of business is it? And they go, we've got some things, and money comes in and out, we kind of sell some stuff, and you can't, we really, we've been in business a few years, and it's, I'm the mid-level manager. You can't really describe it, but you know what? We're on Duxton Road, we're only open Thursdays at 11 o'clock for 1 hour, you gotta check us out. Now would you really get in your car and go check out somebody's business if they couldn't even tell you what they do? Of course not. They lost you. In that moment where they couldn't tell you what they do, they completely and forever lost your attention. So sometimes musicians wonder why people don't come to their gigs. And I've seen a huge change happen by having one simple phrase that describes your music well can make all the difference in the world. And the best example I ever saw of this, in all my years kind of working in the US music business, was there was a guy in Nashville. He had a band that had been playing for about 5 years, kind of mid-level success. And they would play at bars, 30 or 40 people would come. But what they really wanted to do was to play big music festivals, big outdoor summertime festivals. And they'd constantly been trying to contact the booking agents that book these festivals and never got any reaction. Then one day at one of their shows, some drunk guy in between songs comes up and says, you know what you guys are? You're hillbilly flamenco. And they love that description, hillbilly flamenco. And the band started laughing and the audience laughed. And then on the drive home, they're still laughing about that 2-word description, hillbilly flamenco. And then the next week at the rehearsal, they're still laughing about it. And they said, guys, this drunk guy said 2 words and we're still laughing about it a week later. Why don't we use it? And so from that moment on, they started using the phrase hillbilly flamenco to describe their sound. And he said, Derek, from that point on, our career was kind of going like this, and as soon as we started calling ourselves hillbilly flamenco, everything went like that. He said, what we do is at every show, we pause at a couple points during the show, we say, okay audience, so tomorrow when you're at work and somebody's asking what kind of band you saw last night, everybody's gonna ask you what kind of music was it. And in case you wanna know for future use, you can always call our music hillbilly flamenco. The audience would laugh and then they would remember it. And they'd quiz them again at the end of the show. They'd say, and tomorrow when somebody asks what kind of music, what are you gonna tell them? The audience would say, hillbilly flamenco. And he said, from that point, the audiences started increasing, word of mouth spread, our audience size doubled, and he said, best of all, there was this music promoter that we had been calling for 5 years, trying to get into the festival circuit. He was the main guy in charge of booking music festivals in Nashville. He said, for 5 years we've been calling him and mailing him packages, and he never got back to us. And he said, once again we called him, and he said, what kind of music is it? And we said, hillbilly flamenco. And he said, there was a second of silence, and then he laughed really loudly, and he said, you know what, I'm gonna give you my real address this time. He said, now I'm curious to hear this. He said, so we sent him our package, and we've been playing music festivals for the last 3 years. So it was, to me, like the power of just, whatever kind of music you do, come up with a short phrase to describe it. It doesn't have to, I think unfortunately musicians have this thing where they think, when somebody says, what kind of music do you do? That all of a sudden you have to kind of like justify your existence on earth, like every note you have ever played and will ever play. But instead, if you just find a few words that make people more curious to hear you, it can open doors and make word of mouth spread easier. Yeah, that's my talk for now. Any questions?
Okay. Just a quick one. Yeah, since you run CDBaby, how is the proportion of music outside US selling compared to the US-based ones?
I think the nice thing about this kind of internet sale of music, whether it's iTunes, Amazon, whatever, is that people often don't even know where you're from. It's truly like that kind of level playing field where people go to something like iTunes or Amazon and they just check out music, not even knowing where it's from and not even caring. They're actually just looking for new music. The biggest technique I found, and please, like if you guys are putting out your own album of your own music, please remember this. Something brand new happened when digital music started selling, like iTunes style. In the old days, if you would walk into a record store, a CD shop, you can't walk into the store and say, show me show me every record that is doing the song Wonderwall by Oasis. They'd say, well, get Oasis. And you say, yeah, but are there any cover versions of it? And the CD shop could never tell you if there were cover versions. But what's happening now on Apple iTunes is if somebody wants to hear Wonderwall by Oasis, they'll go into the search box and they'll type Wonderwall. And only 2 versions come up. The one by Oasis and a cover song by some girl named Melissa Rabronia in Toronto. Well, you don't even know she's in Toronto. It just says, Wonderwall, 2 results found, Oasis and Melissa Rabronia. And if you love the song, you can't help but go, who? And you click it and you listen. And you say, oh, this is good. And then you listen to see what else she's done. So I've accidentally told you the story in the reverse order. The way it really happens when the iTunes Music Store launched, CDBaby was one of the distributors to iTunes. And all of a sudden, our best sellers in physical CDs were not selling well on iTunes. And some of our top sellers at iTunes were albums that nobody ever bought on CD. And it took me a long time to figure out, what the hell is going on? Like, why is this one? I've been selling this for 5 years. I sold 2 copies. And as soon as iTunes launches, they sell 1,000 copies in a month. What's going on? And it turns out it's because that person had a cover song on their record. And not just a cover song, not just Amazing Grace or something that's been done to death, but a cover song where there are only two versions out there. There's the original and there's yours. And as people are out there looking for music, it's an amazing way to call attention to yourself. So I highly recommend, if you're considering doing your own album of music, spend a little research time on iTunes thinking of some of your favorite songs and find one that has not been covered yet, or if you search for it in the search box, only one version comes up, and it's the original artist, and do a cover version of that song. And what's amazing is it calls attention not just to that song, but then people often end up clicking through and buying a whole album of 15 songs or whatever, just because you have one cover song on your album. So, and everything I'm describing, it's like, it doesn't matter where you are. So that's what I love about, I mean, at CDBaby I had probably 75 clients in Singapore, and everywhere, this is my wife's side, everywhere we travel, you know, we go to Iceland, and there are 40 musicians I know in Iceland. And it's just like, I love the fact that it's just kind of this neutral world where nobody knows or cares where you're from. They're looking for good music. So yeah, it's not really in-person marketing anymore. Long answer, short question. Sorry.
Okay, I've seen these YouTube musicians. They have bands and so on. Very niche. There's one that devotes their music to Doctor Who. There's another that does music for Harry Potter and so on. There's even one that's like their band is called Driftless Pony Club. They do tours and so on. How do you? What's your opinion on the effectiveness of marketing themselves this way?
I think that's. I'm sorry. I don't know if you can hear his question back there. Sorry. He talked about He said on YouTube I've seen these niche artists. So somebody that does music just for Harry Potter, about Harry Potter. Somebody else that does music just for, what was another? Doctor Who. Okay. I'm a huge fan of this. Just the fact that you started out by saying, I've found these artists on YouTube. You didn't say, I found this artist on YouTube named Mark Smith that writes songs about his life. I found an artist or a band called December in Illinois that writes songs about their life. That's not interesting. But somebody doing music about Doctor Who or about Harry Potter, that's newsworthy. So I think in the music business, sometimes we accidentally think that piracy is the enemy, but I think that obscurity is the enemy. That the biggest problem you have to solve is that people haven't heard of you. And if you think of like the world's attention as a big cloud that you need to cut through, you can't cut through anything unless you're sharply defined. You know, you can't try to take a sausage and use it as a knife. You have to get a knife. So I strongly recommend everybody be sharply defined and intentionally limit yourself to saying, I'm going to write 20 songs about Doctor Who or whatever. Because just that alone, limiting yourself and being sharply defined will make it so much more easier for people to tell each other about you. Whereas the opposite, what I see a lot of musicians do, especially for their first album, they say, my name is Tracy Miller and I'm doing an album about my life. Nobody wants to hear about Tracy Miller, your life. That's not newsworthy. Nobody's going to write an article about that saying, oh, Tracy Miller wrote something about her life. Everybody look over here. Yeah, so, those two examples, I hadn't heard those examples, but just the fact that you had heard of those examples and noticed them, to me it means they're doing something right. So I highly recommend, sometimes musicians say to me like, oh, but the world is overcrowded, the market is already saturated, there's nothing I can do. I say, come on, it's a creative challenge. How about you write an album called 60 that consists of 60 songs that are exactly 60 seconds each and all have lyrics about numbers. Go. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's your project. Now you've got a creative experiment. Instead of just trying to write about life, you know, you could write a whole album about food. You call it Sushi, Souffle, and Other Delights. And that would be your new album. And that in itself would be so much more newsworthy than making a new album and calling it Yesterday or Tomorrow or whatever. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of niches.
And they sell their songs on iTunes.
Yeah, I mean they sell on iTunes also. I mean they sell everywhere. I think when you do something niche, that strongly niched, then you can actually get newspapers to write about you. Then you become like an interesting news story that people will want to write about, you know, Sushi, Souffle, and Other savory treats, just because that's an interesting album, or an album called 60, that's 60 seconds of 60 songs. That's newsworthy in itself. So not even just like iTunes, like then the world is your market, because you're doing something, oops. Sorry, thank you.